Well, tradition has it that I'm now supposed to introduce all my guests to my podcast and I'm supposed to give you why I'm speaking to them. And the reason why tradition has that as an embed is because I found that there is almost no way, funnily enough, that I can finish a conversation off in 1 hour. And that could be both my fault or it looks like it's my fault, right? I probably underestimate the fact that I can pick a brilliant person's mind in 1 hour. And the brilliant person that I have on the episode today is Dr. Sudhir Kakar. And anybody who's been invested in psychology, therapeutic psychology, or psychoanalysis in India has heard of Dr. Sudhir Kakar. In fact, some of you have probably even read the prolific amount of books that he's written. He's been a contributor to the Indian thought for a very long period of time, and I was blessed and privileged to have had a conversation with the man himself. I think the more interesting part of my introduction is going to be the reason why I had the conversation with him. And to explain the reason to you, I'll have to tell you a little bit of my story. When I came to Columbia first, after having rejected a career path in finance and law and all those things back in India, I wanted to study philosophy. I wanted an answer to the bigger questions in life. And so day one, class one, I sat in a philosophy class. It was called Methods and Problems in Philosophy. We started with, I think, Descartes' second meditation. And day one, I was like, this is some bullshit. This is some bullshit. In the name of philosophy, they're still teaching me inside the box thinking. They're not teaching me first principle thinking. And so I was heavy pissed. I was like, this is not going to work. So I spent the next semester and a half jumping from classes to classes, disciplines to disciplines, trying to understand what I really wanted to study now, because philosophy was not going to be it. I'm still interested in philosophy, just not academic philosophy. So what I did was I started sitting in classes that were film, that were religion, that were anthropology. I was sitting in biology classes. I was sitting in all this variety of classes until I found economics. And with economics, I found some sort of a behavioral data-centric approach to understanding how humans will behave in complex systems. And I was fond of it. I've never liked the mathematics that economics involved, but the reasoning is something I was fond of. So I took an economic approach to understanding philosophy in one sense of the word. And then later on, I sat in a class about evolutionary psychology. This was summer of 2018. And in that class, my mind was blown. I was like, this is the first principles thinking that I'm looking for. Since then, my views on evolution have changed as well. Since then, my view on evolutionary psychology has changed as well. But that is my introduction to psychology as a discipline, something that I wanted to study. I had not recognized that psychology was a romance that I was carrying in my heart. That is the moment I decided psychology is going to be my major. Now, a lot of people think that what I do, especially on my Hindi channel, Prakhar Ke Pravachan, comes from academic psychology. And nothing can be farther from the truth. I've always been a devout first principle thinker. I respect and I adore the way I think. I've never been not fond of that. For me, psychology, academic psychology, was only a means of verifying what I'd thought of and extending what I hadn't thought of. That is how I got acquainted and I flirted with psychology over the last 2 years at Columbia. And in doing so, this was something around this March or April. I was thinking about the idea. I think I was on a group chat on one of the social media platforms where I sort of gave the impression to people that psychology had got it all wrong. And people started questioning me about it. And in introspecting how wrong psychology had got it, I realized psychology has really got things all massively messed up. Without getting into too much detail about how it's gotten it that bad, I'll give you a small example. So for instance, if a study in psychology is going to measure how I feel after a certain activity, it's going to ask me to rate my happiness levels between 1 and 10. And what kind of a bullshit assumption is that you can rate emotions on a scale of 1 to 10? Not just that, but psychology also takes things for static, right? So like, what is your happiness levels now? But what happens in real life is when I observe my happiness levels, there is another mental reaction that happens that probably changes my happiness levels. And that is something that psychology has no provision to incorporate, the dynamic nature of the mind. However, the father of modern psychology, Freud, who also came up with psychoanalysis, he had it figured out. Psychoanalysis has that element figured out. Psychoanalysis, even though extremely ambiguous and vague to the academic scientific mind, and thus the reputation of psychoanalysis as some sort of a difficult therapeutic setting follows, because there is so much ambiguity and there is so much cultural localization in the earlier psychoanalysts, which is Freud, Jung, and all those people. Dr. Sudhir Kakar is a psychoanalyst from India, and he has focused his energies, his work on translating psychoanalysis to the Indian context. Like Dr. Kakar says, psychoanalysis is like wine. The flavor of the wine depends on where it was raised. And so psychoanalysis needs a local cultural context to be understood for the local person. And so Dr. Kakkar's brand of psychoanalysis is local to India and the culture of India. And we had a conversation about that, about the dynamic psyche of the Indian person. And I think that was a phenomenal conversation. The conversation went in the direction of how to translate Jung and how to translate Freud into the Indian context, to what cultural psyche is, to what the cultural unconscious is, to how Bollywood shapes that cultural unconscious. And in that process, I learned a lot. I am so excited to have another conversation with him already. I have so many questions that I could not pick in that 1 hour window. That is the reason why I had that conversation with him, because I was so infatuated by psychoanalysis. I always thought that behaviorism, which ruled psychology in the 50s and the 60s, is such an infantile approach to understanding the mind. It's almost, I mean, I understand that I have the privilege of hindsight, that I can look back and be like, haha, those guys were fools. But to come up with an idea where everything is dictated by behavior and there is no substance to thought is infantile in my view. And that is what I mean by the fact that psychology has gotten it wrong. The fact that psychology uses the approach of understanding computers to understand mind, which is cognitive psychology, is infantile. I don't think they got that bit right. And I think in a lot of ways, incorporating Buddhist and Hindu ideas, and I don't mean that because Buddhist and Hindu ideas are mine, but because I've spent enough time with them, gives you a deeper and a sharper picture of the mental condition, the human condition of the mind. And so that is precisely why I've been interested in breaking the mold of psychology beyond. And that is the reason why Dr. Sudhir Kakar was on my list of conversations. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Welcome to another episode of PG Radio. I will see you on the other side. So, sir, thank you so much for doing this. This is my, I cannot say, I don't know how to properly express this, but let me give it a shot. When I bumped across, when I discovered my interest for psychology and from there psychoanalysis, I was fascinated. And I was like, why is it that there is almost nobody whose psychoanalysis I can just read and be like, oh my God, this fits, right? And possibly that was because, like you say, psychoanalysis is a vine that needs to ferment near the ground that it is raised in, that there is a massive cultural aspect possibly, or there's some differentiation, right? And when I came across you, it was almost like discovering two different parts of me. The part of me that's Indian and the part of me that's fascinated by these sciences. So thank you so much for being you, sir, first of all. Secondly, I want to ask you, what is this difference? Like, how is Indian psychoanalysis different from classical Freudian, Jungian psychoanalysis?
Okay. There are three basic assumptions in psychoanalysis, which are, I think, common to everywhere. And those three are the importance of the unconscious part of the mind. That is 95% of our mental life is really unconscious. And that is common to everyone. And the second basic assumption of psychoanalysis, that early childhood is very formative in the development of the personality. That is also common. And then third is that our mental life is really a dialectic or a conflict between conscious and unconscious, and a dynamic that keeps on taking place all the time.
Right.
So those three are the common. The rest is, is the superstructure which differs.
Right. But then my question is, and I mean, I would want to jump to the cultural aspects of Indian psychoanalysis too, because I think they're very interesting. But I don't see psychology betraying those three assumptions as well. Like, I have my complaints with psychology as a discipline, but I think they still sort of believe in the idea that, so how is it that psychoanalysis is different from other schools of psychology? And I understand psychoanalysis is therapeutic at its core, and then from there philosophical, if at all. But what is the structural difference between the two?
Between psychoanalysis and psychology?
And and everyday psychology that we like, that I get across, to social psychology, personal psychology, how are they different?
No, they are much more the emphasis on the unconscious part, and the access to the unconscious is a very different part of it. Most of the psychology is much more cognitive, although it is changing. I mean, of course, in psychology also, especially strangely enough in economics, behavioral economics, for instance, is much more psychoanalytic in that sense of that they call it I won't call it the irrational, but the non-rational processes play a great deal. So that is a big difference. But psychology mostly has assumed a universality, that we are all the same. And so much of psychology is really is based on, say, so many studies of college students in America. So there are some, of course, more and more. There are much more, but that has been one of the basics of that middle class European or American man is what a human being is. So anthropology has been much more creative in that one, and has questioned that. And anthropology has, of course, influenced me also much more to move towards the cultural psychology, as I'd call it.
Personally, I have found, and it took me a little bit of a minute to understand. And my story is very similar. So I wanted to study philosophy. Okay. I came to America, wanted to study philosophy. I sit in my first class. I'm like, I will never learn how to think properly if I follow this inside the box way of thinking. What I'll do is I'll approach philosophy sideways. So I went to, I sat in a film class. I sat in an anthropology, sociology class. Eventually, I bargained with my parents enough, and they were like, "Acha, economics kar lo." Okay? So I was like, "Chalo, economics to kar hi lete hain. With this falls half." And then I realized that I was actually deeply interested in psychology. And that's when I started sitting in evolutionary sciences and biology and all these classes to get to psychology. What I realized was psychology is extremely static. Like, first of all, how I cannot put a number to my sadness. I'm sure nobody can put a number to their sadness, and that number is going to be so, like, self-reports are obviously distorted. So I realized that the premise on which psychology operates, which works great for things like, say, probably consumer behavior, or work things like where mathematics could be, where numbers could be used, where you could use a cardinal ordinal approach, for psychology it does not work. And for psychoanalysis, it steers
completely.
It's like, listen, there is something more dynamic happening in the brain. There is an interaction within the brain itself that psychology does not seem to probably understand. Am I correct in formulating that?
Yes, but I mean, some schools of psychology look at that as a black box. They don't care about it. Andar kya hota hai doesn't matter.
Right.
It is your behavior which is important. Whether we can change that or not, that is the important part of it. There is this big joke about the behavioral psychologist that after a couple has had made love, they ask each other, how was it for me?
Right. Is that also a heritage that is being carried because of the Eurocentrism, or like the American centricism of, right, the material reductionist approach of the entire thing? Because I heard you talk about how there is a spiritual angle within psychoanalysis.
Right. You're quite right, because that is something, of course, which psychoanalysis also doesn't agree with. It is, in that sense, very much that is Freud's legacy also, of the complete, very much suspicion of the spiritual side. As you know, Freud was a great friend of Romain Rolland, who had written, an admirer of Romain Rolland, who had written this biography of Ramakrishna, and he had sent it to Freud, and that's where Freud has said, that actually I have never felt it myself, but I can imagine that some people, mystics, have felt it. But my interest in religion is not the mystic feeling, but the mystic ritual, not the religious rituals and the religious, what would cause it, theology, etc. And that is, but he was not completely against the spiritual side. But of course, what happened was his fight with Jung, which then moved psychoanalysis to have complete suspicion of the spiritual side, which was then left to Jung. So for a long time. But these things pass, Freud has been dead for a long time. Jung has been dead for a long time. And my feeling is that there is also a spiritual part of the psychoanalysis, can be part of it, that normal Western psychoanalysis is, let's say, the masters, which you have to go through to get to the PhD one. You cannot skip that. So I think the psyche, to know the psyche, understand the psyche, is very important to get to the spiritual one also. Because otherwise it is often very, very much defenses and all kind of things which happen there. So you do have to know yourself. You have to understand what is your unconscious, then to go further from it. Because then the idea that individuals' autonomy is the only important part. That what is psychoanalysis is give you freedom from inhibitions, lead your life, give you choices, freedom from inhibition. But it comes only to my choices, what I'm going to do, but not whether am I connected to the rest of the creation of the universe also. So mine is not the autonomous individual, but the caring individual should perhaps be the goal of psychoanalysis also. And the caring individual not only assumes, but demands a spiritual element in that sense. The spiritual, what does spiritual element mean? It's really love in its most elevated form. But as I said, it's not a popular position.
Right.
There are, not that there aren't analysts. There are some very very well known one. I mean, I would call Lacan a mystic analyst, and Bion, and also there also, but very few. Yeah.
Right. There is the way I would say is that you need to first construct an I to eventually then dilute it, right?
Right.
You have to go through the process. It's almost like when I was younger, I was like, I don't need no money. I don't need no money. And as I grew, I realized I can say I don't need no money once I've had the money. Unless you take that detour, your journey is not complete. Otherwise, there is only rejection. So at least that's how I would see it. But within this animated battle that people who carry Freud's and Jung's legacy, or at least, there is sort of like this divisiveness between, you are more likely to follow Jung, you are more likely to follow Freud. From what I understand, this notion of cultural psychology is more a Jungian idea than a Freudian idea, right?
No, because the Jungian idea is also not the cultural part. The cultural one is between. The Jungian idea is there's an existence of a universal unconscious part.
Right.
And the Freudian is, I'm putting it very simplified, there's only an individual unconscious. I'm saying between the individual and the universe, there is also a cultural unconscious.
Right. And what is this cultural unconscious made of, sir?
The cultural unconscious is exactly the same as all the others. All what we absorb growing up right from the beginning of what are relationships, what are the best kind of relationships, what is good life, what is and going up to what is good food, what is bad food, what is a huge, not a huge number, but actually I would say 4 or 5 important things which give you the you see a baby has no history, and very soon the parents give them the history, and that history is very much their own, their families, but the families in the culture they've grown up. So ideas of what is hierarchical relationships are what is where we learn, and those go as much in the unconscious as the individual experiences of the person.
Right. And I mean, I think I was also listening to another talk where you were talking about the 3 different, I don't know if archetypes is the right word, but 3 different varieties of father stories that we have in our culture. And there was the caring father, there was the desired father, and I think there was one more. And it's all those stories, to me, it seemed like were part of the cultural unconscious, which is, the large corpus of cultural stories that exist that we borrow from to create architectures of behavior as we go forward in our life. And that is how I would explain that. Now, my question is, a very close friend of mine who is a producer on the show with me here is Muslim. He's never heard the story of Yayati or the story of Dashrath and Ram and all of that. Does the cultural unconscious still affect him in that sense? Does that still get passed on through, say, for instance, me, the way I behave? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I think basically I was talking much more of the Hindu unconscious, but but people living in India have been also greatly influenced, even if they are Muslim. I think an Indian Muslim is very different from an Arab Muslim
Right.
because some of that has come up. Because one knows they have heard the stories, they've listened to the bhajans and songs from Mantar Hare Ram, or famous Bollywood
Sir,
song
I can't hear you.
composed.
I think आपके
Oh,
mic में
I
there's something with your mic. Is there a fan?
uh, no, there's not a fan. There's a huge rain which has just come.
Oh, अच्छा. Just
It's
just just keep जो आपका उसका headphone microphone वो है ना उसको सर अपने face के पास रख लो जब आप when you speak and that's all. That should be it.
all right.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
हाँ जी, हाँ जी.
Okay. Okay. So when there's a lot of light classical music, which is sung by Muslims also, and their Ram and the bhajan, etc. So there has been an influence, but of course they have their culture unconscious has some other stuff also coming in. But
Right.
I think all communities have been influenced somewhere,
Right.
but
Right.
much more the Hindu unconscious in that sense. I think
Right.
they have a lot of Ramayana, everyone in India, Mahabharata, etc. They have heard those stories.
Right. Right. Interesting. Interesting. And so my question is, if 95% of me is made up of these stories, these then to what? First of all, how is it that I'm processing stuff differently in my unconscious? Say the relationships that you were talking about when I was like, what do cultural unconscious mean? You were like the relationships that you learn when you were growing up and all of that. How is that different from my conscious part? Like, where is the difference there? Because I mean, I see my relationships consciously as well as unconsciously. What's the separation?
Yeah. No, that's the negotiation which every individual does, because there is an individual part, there's a cultural part, and there is a universal part. So it is all the negotiation between the three you are doing all the time.
Right. Interesting. And so this whole idea that there is an individual part of me, a cultural part of me, and a universal part of me is how do I sort of intellectually understand that? How do I feel that within myself? Like, how do I understand the separation? Like, what is happening? Do you see what I mean? Is my question clear, or should I try one more time?
Yeah, no, you understand it only through, well, reflection is all I can say about it.
And my point is, in general, psychoanalysis tends to be so ambiguous, so fluid, right? That
Yeah.
it is so fluid, in fact, that people have had enough qualms about raising questions whether this is even an effective method or not, at least in the West, right? Like
No, it's true.
Freud's legacy is no longer celebrated the way I see it. And to me, I'm
Yeah.
like, how can that not be? Do you not understand one of the most important contributions to the understanding of the mind, the separation of the mind, at least in the Western world, was given by this man? So what is happening with that? Why is psychoanalysis no longer, glamorized or even neutralized?
Uh, well, I would say is effectiveness as a therapy. Uh, if you want to kind of get rid of your symptoms, what you're suffering, and which that's why people come to as a healing thing. It's long term. It costs a lot of money. So, and in fact, getting rid of symptoms, almost any system of therapy, including all shamans, sources, etc. They do it. They do as well, as long as you believe in that. So it's not a very effective therapeutic system, although there have been now kind of studies compared to cognitive behavior that it is more effective long term than in short term. But all those are all contested ones. So if you want to kind of get rid of your pain, it is not because, for instance, it says that, I mean, Freud, that sentence is not a very good one when he says all it wants to do is transform your hysterical misery into common human unhappiness. Now, who does want only common human unhappiness? If that is all what psychoanalysis is offering, is that people want to, and especially in America, positive psychology, etc. You want to be happy. So happiness is not a psychoanalytic aim. Understanding, self-understanding is your aim, not happiness. It can bring happiness, maybe, but it can also bring sadness.
I think around this time, a little later than this time last year, I had been extremely unhappy and I was worried that I might be depressed. So I went and saw a bunch of therapists, and surprisingly enough, it was only the psychoanalyst eventually that worked for me. And the woman in question, the therapist in question, was a Lacanian Freudian psychoanalyst. And I think it was a very different experience altogether. Because part of my job as I walked in, I realized, was to forget that she existed. Part of my job was to think of her as existing as a picture where she's inanimate. So I can then feel comfortable enough to just say. And every time I'd walk out of that setting, 45 minutes of speaking, first of all, never knew where those 45 minutes went. Right? And as soon as I'd walk out, it would feel like the world was no longer the same. It was almost as if pieces in my visual field were moving. Now, I could never ask her, apparently, so a part of the psychoanalyst deal is that I can never be friends with her. But I want to ask you, what is really happening there? What is really happening there? Is there a common explanation for this, or would you have to take it case by case?
No, but the common explanation is that she or he is, the most important part is listening to your empathy, trying to feel what you're feeling, etc. And you are getting that. She or he, I mean, when somebody comes to me, I say immediately, I have no idea of what is troubling you, who you are. I don't believe in any diagnostic stuff at all. We have both to learn and go on this journey together. And you are the one who really knows. My job is just to enable you to know that. So if there's something which I feel, you have missed it, I will point out, is there any connection? And then you can. So it gives you actually much more autonomy on how and where you want to go. There are no judgments going to be there at all. So the function is only to be as open as you can, and I'll be there to at least not prevent, but guard you again, because it's always accompanied by fears also. And you come to any therapist with mixture of hope and fear. So the hope is the one which brings you because you are in pain, but the fears start coming up. What if this is going to, where am I going? So as long as you get that, what is called the therapeutic alliance, as it seems you got with this, this therapist, that you will be contained. तुमको बिल्कुल मार नहीं कोई डालेगा is more than enough.
Right. And it was, to me, it was an acquaintance that I made with myself. Right. I never got to know her. I don't even probably remember her name. And I spent a considerable amount of time, but I got to know myself in a very weird way. And what was happening was, there were two interesting things. One, I would say things and I'd be like, did I say that? Where is that coming from? And that's so interesting. And I'd be like, and I think part of this saying something that probably existed in the back of my head that would then begin to restructure my world outside is my explanation. The second thing is, there were still connections that would exist that I would not notice in my blah, 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 blah for 45 minutes, that she'd casually point to be like, oh, by the way, you missed out on that. And I was meeting myself on a whole different level. As far as the fear was concerned, I realized that there were parts of me I was so afraid of confronting. How dare I say that this is what I think about myself? Oh my God. And as I got closer to say that, just saying that transformed my entire relationship with those things. So what is this magic that psychoanalysis understands, that psychology or like cognitive behavioral therapy would have treated it in a reverse engineered behavior to cognition fashion.
Well, I mean, there is no magic. You have done really all the work. You are ready to go there. All you want is that I will be, so to say, contained. Yeah, nothing bad is going to happen to me. And when there's some nudges needed, I would get them. So you've done all this. There is no magic. It is.
I mean, my question is like from a therapist standpoint, I understand that there is no magic.
Right.
Prakhar has to do all his work. That I understand.
Yeah.
In fact, I respect that because only I have all the information on me, right?
Absolutely.
Like how else can somebody, right? But my question is like, how is it that as soon as I say something, like I was reading a quote earlier today, somebody sent me, and I think it's a Jungian quote: "As long as you let your unconscious be unconscious and not your conscious, you will call your life fate-driven." Something to that effect. Is that what's happening when I'm saying something? My unconscious is becoming conscious. Like, what is this process that is happening when I'm speaking?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole idea behind is to make the unconscious conscious. Only one knows the unconscious is a huge thing. You are not going to make all the unconscious conscious. But there's a huge sense of discovery and of this kind of feeling of amazement and wonderment of what all I have inside me, which could have been also frightening, embarrassing, shameful, etc. That it is all okay. And in Freudian or any psychoanalysis, that desire, which it cannot be eliminated, which some of the spiritual traditions think it can.
Right.
Maybe they're right. I don't know, but mine would be: all you can do is to understand it, and not all you can do. That is what you need to do, is to understand, not to eliminate. And that's what is a huge sense of well-being when you are doing that. I'm understanding my desires.
Right. Have you, sir, read Zizek?
I have not. I mean, I've read his articles, etc.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But like what I think he's trying to do from a psychoanalytical framework is bring to the conscious what you might call as cultural unconscious, where he's trying to bring out parts. Is that a thing? Can we create, like, can we make the cultural unconscious the cultural conscious? Is that a transmutation that right? Is that possible?
I think that very much so. And that's when we can get back to what you asked for, the Indian part of it.
Right.
So when the Indian part is, I mean, when I did go also to Western psychoanalyst, that's where my training was. There was often my feeling, he doesn't quite understand me. So that is where my Indian cultural unconscious was coming. And how can he? Because psychoanalysts also grow up in their own cultural part of it. So the cultural unconscious is as much a part of the psychoanalyst as of the client there. And sometimes it is they do not understand that. I remember Beethoven was absolute noise completely. I mean, what is earlier? Now, of course, I do.
Right.
And he couldn't understand. I didn't play for him, but I loved Indian classical music, and for him, what is this? So I mean, this is just a small kind of example. There's so many of these where the cultural part comes in,
right?
Which often is then get missed.
When you say that, because I'm unsure about timelines here, were you really hanging out with Beethoven?
Afterwards.
After
because I was there, because I had to know their culture, etc. What do they value? What do they believe in? Which started making me know, what do I believe in? What do I want to listen to? Why do I kind of those? So in fact, so it often this confrontation or encounter with the culture unconscious happens when you're outside your own culture.
I was going to say, it is like when you have a mirror from something, like
absolutely.
Yeah. At what point? And so, okay, here is how I'll frame this question. I grew up so angry at Bollywood for selling me, peddling me ideas. So have you seen Gangs of Wasseypur?
Yes.
You know the famous line, "जब तक cinema रहेगा लोग यहाँ पे." It's that cinema teaches you how to desire. That, you know, has been my frustration since forever. What to desire and then how to desire. And when I talk to a lot of my friends, when I talk to women my age, when I talk to men my age, and I understand, say, for instance, the concept of romance, it is so
Yeah.
Bollywood ridden, I would automatically guess that their cultural unconscious is Bollywood. Is that possible? Do you think kuch kuch hota hai can be part of my generation's cultural unconscious?
Very much so. Yeah.
And in light of that, is there not, and I'm not passing a normative judgment on kuch kuch hota hai at this moment, but I'm generally concerned if this cultural unconscious is so important that it's driving the interface between the universal and the individual in me. Should that not remain nourished for all of us? Should we not then be switching off our Netflix and then probably picking up one of these books to read?
No, I mean, you are confronting is a bad word.
Right.
You are encountering your cultural unconscious. Now, the thing is, then of course you have the choice of rejecting parts of it. That is what the whole part of psychoanalysis would be: rejecting that. Okay, I have that in me, but this is not my choice. My choice is going to be that, or the Western one which you pick up, which is given to you when you look at it. This is a Western cultural one. Okay, I'll do it. Accept that. This is what I'm going to do. Or no, I reject that. But not to see the Western only as the normative one, as that is what all human beings are.
Right. I have seen the West minimizes, and I mean, it could be for more than one reason. Again, not a normative statement, but they minimize the differences between where I come from and where I am right now. I'm currently in New York at Columbia, as that of the difference between an individualistic culture and a collectivist culture. And I think that is only is a prima facie labeling difference. The real meat begins when we start looking into it. And so here is how I've come to realize something, and tell me if it makes sense to you. Because we, I think, are an inherently role-playing culture. We are not pragmatic about our realities. We are extremely attached to our roles. So the example I use is Prakhar ke Papa is Prakhar ke Papa. When he's speaking to Prakhar, he's no longer whatever person he is. He has to play that role, and that takes precedence over almost any other identity he has. And we participate in this grand theater where we exchange roles, we move from one to the other, all of that very, very quickly. And what that means is, if my friend calls me up in India right now, he's like, I'm having trouble, I need money. My first response is, yes, you can have it, but what do you need it for again? While here in America, it's like, what do you need it for? And then maybe at the end of the negotiation, I say yes. Right? Is that reflective of some cultural something that you might have studied? Am I making sense to you?
No, you're making very sense. Yeah, but that is where you are doing it then. Then you can choose which one to.
Of course, right.
So, but if you don't have the choice at all, if it's in an automatic role play, and it has got good adaptive parts also, this role playing, because that's what makes Indians very successful, because they come and adapt to any culture where they are very, very fast. But there is always some niggling feeling of, I think, discomfort there of, is this a false self? Do I have also an authentic self, which is different from the role playing? And any kind of this therapeutic culture, whichever one is.
What is an authentic self?
Sorry?
How do I think of an authentic self? How do I conceptualize that?
When you feel that I am there in all my role playing, I'm doing it, but there is an I there, which is not only role playing. I'm doing this because, so I'm not identifying with the role.
Which is not like my environment is not forcing me to do this. There is an autonomy within me that's making me do this.
That is making, yeah.
But sir, here is what I understand also, is that almost all social interaction is a performance. If I keep going down the rabbit hole of what is authentically me, I discover that I hit a massive roadblock, which is everything that I am is borrowed. So what is this authentic self? Is this an illusion I'm creating for myself, or is this real?
My feeling would be that there is a real, that one looks for it and I think where the power of the of love there of another person, that is very much strongly that here, or that hope is that here my authentic self is going to come, that there will be no role playing at all. And so whether is that an illusion, but at least that is the, I think, a big hope which makes romantic relationships very much so powerful. So it's not only just the sexual drive or the sexual attraction, but that I will have somebody where I can be, and he or she will be a mirror to do that, which is also in the therapy part, right? I think you go to therapy also of, is there an authentic self here which needs to, I want to know about.
That is super interesting. And sir, is this authentic self an evolving being? Because if I want to incorporate the idea of a diluted I in the spiritual sense, then my authentic self has to at some point, like, where will the universal love come from if the authentic self is not evolving? It has to then, right?
Of course.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
And
not,
this,
there's no fixity there. Yeah.
but then, and in this evolution, this evolution is going to be again environmentally driven. What I experience, how I do, whatever happens, right? So to that extent, it could be that my authentic self has a borrowed element from the environment, but at the end of the day, there is some part of me that is authentic in your belief.
That the authentic self will keep on somewhere feeling, this is not me. This is the color which I'm taking from the environment. Okay, I will do it because it is needed for that, but I'm only doing it so that you're making a choice again of doing it. So the environment in that sense, yes.
Right. And is there a problem of over authenticity too? Because if I'm defining a problem on one end of the scale, my instinct is to go on the other end of the scale and see what the trade-off is. So what is is there an over authentic self, somebody that's overly just itself and does not pay attention to the environment? Is that a thing that comes up? Possibly? Case by case?
That is the great mystics. Ramakrishna, for instance, or Ramana Maharishi, or the ones. So our admiration for the great mystics, I think, is also the feeling or the wish, maybe, that these are completely authentic self people.
Right. And they inevitably, would you say that this mystic inevitably embodies the spiritual, and therefore this is how the chain connects for you, that in your over authentic, self, maybe you have to go down that road? Maybe. Okay.
Yeah.
How is, and I mean, feel free to not comment because I understand there is a predicament, but the last 5 or 6 years, there has been an upward trajectory to, let's say, overt patriotism. Right, to overtly feeling, because I remember back when I was growing up, when I was more 15 than 24, or even before that, the concept of India in my socioeconomic strata would not inspire, but would incite a negative emotion. That has changed. Now it is my India, we'll show China this, that. Is there something that you've thought of, that you've worked on, that explains this phenomena? Is there some light that you'd be able to shed on? Would you be able to speculate on this? Is there a cultural unconscious part that's becoming conscious?
I think when one starts becoming uprooted from one's cultural moorings, then you need to find some other moorings there, and I think that's happening. So the nationalism is not a traditionalist. So a traditionalist wouldn't be a nationalist at all, because he or she is more in that, in that very much, who doesn't need the nation. So to become part of that, you always it's still the cultural unconscious. It means only that I still need to feel that I'm part of a bigger community. That is
That is the
that
driving
really,
force.
that is the driving force. And since my communities are the ones which used to be there, I'm losing them or have lost them. They don't mean that much to me, etc. So it is a search for which community is going to give me that feeling of I belong to another community. And I think that so much of the modernization will lead to that.
What is so? There was a very interesting question that was posed to me by somebody here at Columbia, and that question then further reflects upon another question. So let me start with that question. Maybe get to the other question. The first question was, like, I understand the difference between what Freud and Jung are trying to say, but the real part is that Jung does not explain what motivations are made out of. Freud says it's aggression, sex. He still classifies that into some kind of a biological drive. Jung talks about the architecture in which those motivations are affected, right? But the question that this reflects upon from there is that almost all these people had one or the other end goal. I think Adler was about self-realization or self-enhancement or self-mastery or something like that. What is it that your brand of psychoanalysis, your version of psychoanalysis, takes for the individual end goal to be? Is it primarily therapeutic, unease and all that, or?
No, my goal is of a self-understanding, I would say, growth of wisdom, and not which goes beyond the individual, only my mine, to not only my community or nation, but well, I mean, in the sense of much more connection, sympathy or empathy with all creation. So it sounds too much. It sounds too much, but that would be my preferred goal. And Jung Freud is the difference is, as you said, Freud is much more originological, but that your origins are the ones which are important. And Jung is much more teleological, that your ends, where you are going, that is important. So I always feel that psychoanalysis is Freudian is very good for people under 40, 50. After that, I think a Jungian analysis is a better one as you go towards your end. Yeah.
So this is exactly like you got the you were like, okay, I can now choose. The autonomy to choose between the two is where it's very interesting. Very interesting. I had one question in mind that I think I'm yes, right. So when I understand that what you said sounds too abstract, or for that matter, too esoteric, because I was a reductionist once. I was somebody who not understood the immaterial, let's just say amaterial, if not material, until I sat in a Vipassana retreat sometime around the same time last year, right? And there is almost no words. There was, because one, you cannot write while those realizations are happening in your head, but there are no words to the amount of transformation that something like that offered me. And part of that transformation was selfhood, where I was seeing myself, making friends with myself, becoming more connected, acquainted with myself. And then towards the end, they tell you, we have a balm for all the surgery you've been doing inside your head. And that is then outward. That is then offering everybody else the merits you have. And again, for the first time you hear it, you're like, okay, this is a little absurd. Like, I can manage myself, but the last 3 or 5 minutes where everything that I've meditated upon now goes out to the world, serves as some incredible, let's say, pain relief on the pain of realizing how limited and how insignificant and all those other, what Freud calls ambient misery, whatever that might be. What do you have to say about that? Like, how does spiritual practices like those fit into the psychoanalytical framework?
Well, to my framework, they fit in that what it should increase is not only the autonomy, again the same thing, but your connectedness to autonomy. But you cannot discard that autonomy part of unless you know yourself. You cannot really discard that, and but then it should go further to your increasing your connectedness to, as you said, to the world, to its part,
Right.
not world. Yeah,
Right.
not only people, but all the rest of the stuff.
And how does creativity get injected into all of this? So if I'm feeling connected, connection comes from expression. Expression must demand some amount of creative thinking, right? Some amount. I'm not saying you have to be creative in the sense of an artist, but how does creativity get inspired within an individual? Is that between the tension of the unconscious and the conscious and the resolution between the two that forces somebody to be creative, or like where is the mechanism for that?
Ah, uh, should look at creativity a little more differentiated. I mean, every child is creative. So there's a creative part in every person. No, you start with. Then there's a kind of a professional creativity of you practice it long, and then you become better and better at it and create, whether it is artist or anything, etc. But I think what people really talk of creativity, they always think of the genius creativity, the number three, that kind of creativity. That's what they normally think of, and not the normal creative part of it. So if you're talking of creativity,
Small c.
that order of the big C
The big
creativity,
C,
then
yes.
the big C creativity, then they're all. And the question is, how does it get so many? There is a West, again, here you see also the cultural part of it. The Western notion of creativity has been right from beginning, is the first, of course, is the Plato one, from outside gods which come, and etc. But the large part of it has been then Aristotle's melancholia, that people who are melancholic are going to be also the creative one. So that's why you have Durer's that drawing very much, or Rodin's this thinker, which every lot of writers put on their book jackets. This one, and that comes from the Western notion of bit melancholic is going to be creative. So, but also that creativity is completely unbounded. You have to live your life, and that is the artist who allows himself or herself everything. Which is now, for instance, when you look at the Indian Shlip Shastras, creativity is you cannot be creative if you let yourself go. It has to be very much bounded. Even the sexual part, etc. No, so it's a very different kind of a creativity in the Indian sense of also what a creative is. Much of the Indian one, of course, they have this, that a part of it comes from your karma, from the previous life. So there are different ways of looking at creativity also. But the modern one, of course, that pain and creativity go very much together. If only someone in great pain can also create. I'm not sure about it. That's a trope which is which is very popular one of anyone who suffers is the one who can create. I'm not sure if that is the mandate.
Right. That trope was again popularized in Bollywood using the film Rockstar. I don't know if you ever came across that.
I haven't seen that, but
yeah, it's a Jim Morris. It's like this Delhi kid who wants to be like Jim Morrison, and he wants pain because otherwise music will not emerge.
I see.
Right.
Yeah.
So that trope is real. Yeah, that does happen. It seems from talking to you that the differences become clearer to me between the Indian and the Western. I am curious, how different are they? Is it like entirely different, or what is the universal aspect?
Yeah.
The three statements that you'd mentioned, are those the only universal aspects, or is there something else that carries? Does sex as a meme that Freud used carry into the Indian psychoanalytical framework as well?
Yes, very much so. I mean, if you I did once a paper, no, not paper, but I mean that Freud is a tantric. So,
Right.
very much so. I mean, there is, yes, or what is one rumor about Freud is that whole that it is the sexual part, and it is and it is quite right. I mean, the whole the tantric view also that how important that is, and that has been all in the Indian texts also that that from the smallest living beings to the highest, to Shiva, etc. That has been the most important part. So it is not that there's such a big difference. Uh, some of the why Jung often gets a difficult problem is that there is not that much emphasis there on the sexual part of a human being, or the erotic force, the life force, etc. So he comes across as a little bloodless. There's not enough blood and
biology
passion
in his right.
Yeah.
But since the cultural connotations of the East, or at least India, and again the Hindu part of India, is so vehemently different from everybody else. First of all, there is no one, there is everyone. We can manufacture gods, no problem. So divinity is wholesale, right? Transcendence is wholesale, whatever that might mean in the psychoanalytic. Then the metaphysics are different in the sense that it's not like if I die, I die. Tomorrow I am a cockroach. Like, how does that impact the societal fabric? Like, how does that impact my unconscious? Like, if I had to leave my listeners with one, say, tool of trying to connect the stories that they've heard, things that they're influenced by, and how that impacts their behavior. Let me take this as an example and ask you, how would you imagine a common relationship between my behavior from these stories, from my cultural unconscious?
I think one of the cultural unconscious stories is there is no absolutes in the Indian unconscious. Everything is relative. There's so many gods. One can do that. One can do that. It depends. All depends on the context. So there is no absolute. There is no thou shalt kill or thou shalt not kill. It depends on where you are. Desh, Shram. There have been 4 coordinates of action in the Hindu one: the culture, the time, your stage of life, and what you inherit from the previous life, which one can say previous life means your forgotten life, the early childhood, I would say that. So, and nobody can know all those 4. So nobody can really know your action is bad or good. So that is, so yes, so you do what your community does, or your caste does, or what your big people do, but nobody can really know if your action is right or wrong. So this kind of uncertainty about right and wrong actions is a very strong part of the Indian culture unconscious. And you see that in the laws also. In the Kama Sutra, for instance, there's a section on seducing wife of other men. So it starts with you shouldn't seduce the lives of others. No, that's the more. Except there's always exception. Right. If you're going to become mad with passion, also if you are going to get some material gains because her husband is something, etc., then you can. And at the end it says, but you shouldn't have done it. But I mean, this is the way.
That's my mind when I'm doing that.
So that's good. And this goes all through. I mean, every law, you shouldn't pee on the king's, that is the Shastra of King's Road.
Right.
Except if you're a small child, old man who can't hold it. So every rule has an exception. So exceptions are so many that there are no rules in that sense and that has the positive part of the, as we said, adapting. So you can adapt very, very fast because there's nothing saying no, yes, no. But it also has a kind of this, people will say, moral ambiguity that all the time, which you deal with it.
And I think that, and that's just me, and maybe it is me for whatever reason I am me, but I just think that is more respectful. Like in the sense that if you create, I'm in the business of offering people advice now. Surprisingly, I found myself there, and I've realized the more, if you sufficiently complicate advice, it starts to look like real life. The more you put ifs, buts, excepts in your, right? And so the more it looks like real life, what that means is that there is a large amount of morality that is relative to at least the first three things that you mentioned. I do not know how much the last life carries into this life. It might, I'm not denying it, not taking it off the table, but it is like there is all these contextual things that need to be evaluated before you evaluate. There is universals too, but and that's the due respect, I think. Even that's my complaint with positive psychology. Like, if you're going to tell me a decision X on the graph is purely positive, like, where is the trade-off? There has to, you have to think about it sophisticatedly enough. You have to. So and maybe that's why I like my psychoanalytical therapeutic setting too, because I could say things, and I knew that I could say things. Right? I mean, I was a child when I did that. I had no better idea, without feeling, and I'm sure no therapist would have judged. But the psychoanalytical therapy just allowed me to never consider even the fact that somebody might judge. And that changed a lot for me. So it just might be. It just might be. Right. But do you have any questions for me? How long have we been at it? Would you say this has been an hour?
I think so, yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Yes, it went very fast. It went fast. Yeah, because you were so good with the questions.
No, please. I'm partly secretly afraid that I made it too boring for you. If I did, please
no, not at all. Not at all. It was a pleasure.
No, Dr. Kakar, the pleasure is absolutely mine. I hope I get one more chance sometime soon. I will email you if you're available. Please, we'll talk about more stuff.
Certainly. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.